All right, so in this video, I'm going to hit on some of these questions. So again, I'm just going to go ahead and do all of these because there were questions about almost every single one of these. Some of them had more than others, but just to be fair, we'll go over all of them. So question number 1, we're looking at just adding or subtracting these. You want to make sure that you combine like terms. So the most difficult thing, or the hardest part about subtracting polynomials, is you got to remember, if you have a minus here, you need to distribute that negative to everything. So the 9a cubed b, that's going to stay the same, but this is going to become minus 10a cubed b. That'll become plus 6a squared b squared, and that other part will become plus 6. So now to combine like terms, we're going to just, like I said, combine similar terms here. So we would have, start out with a 9a cubed b. There's another a cubed b, so 9 minus 10 would be negative 1. So we'll have negative 1 a cubed, a cubed b would be your first term. Or if you put negative 1 in there, that's fine. So we're done with those. I like to cross things out as I get through them, so that way it makes it easier so I see I don't miss anything. But I got to be careful. We're combining like terms here. So the next term I have would be, or the next smallest a would be an a squared. And there's no other a squareds other than this 6a squared b squared. So we don't combine that in the other ab. So don't make that mistake. And then the next smallest a is that 6ab. So we'd have plus 6ab. So we're done with that. Now we're left with the 6 and the minus 4. 6 minus 4 is 2, so we'd have plus 2. So that would be your answer for number 1. Or for 1a. For number 2, for 1b, this one, I don't think, if I remember correctly, anybody had a question on this one. But just to be quick, this one we'd have 6x cubed, combine like terms. The 2x squared would come next, so we'd have 3x squared. Next, we would have just a plain old 2x, so plus 2x. And lastly, we'd have 9 minus 8, which is 1. So that one's a little easier because there's no distributing you have to worry about. You just combine like terms. All right, let's look at the next one. Now, this is where some people start to have problems. So for letter A here, we're going to multiply these using the box method. So if I use the box method, I have 2 terms times 3 terms. So I'm going to create a 2 by 3 grid. Whoops. So negative 2b plus 4 would go here. 5b squared minus 4b plus 2 would go up here. So now we're just going to multiply these together to get the inside pieces. So negative 2b times 5b squared would be negative 10b cubed. And that's where some of you guys are having a hard time. When you multiply two variables, you want to add the exponents. And so that b has an exponent of 1. So 1 plus 2 would be 3. So we have negative 10b cubed. So negative 2b times a negative 4b, well, that's going to be a positive 8b squared. When we get to the next one, negative 2b times 2 would be negative 4b. And the bottom row, 4 times, this will be a little easier, 4 times 5b squared would be 20b squared. 4 times negative 4 is negative 16b. 4 times 2 is 8. So now we look for like terms. So we have some like terms here. We have some like terms here. So we're going to start. So our answer would be negative 10b cubed. And then we would combine the 20b squared and the 8b squared. So that would be plus 28b squared. We have negative 16b minus 4b. That's going to be negative 20b. And we have that plus 8. So that would be your answer. Oops, that doesn't look good. I'll just leave it. That would be your answer for 2a. For 2b, this one I'm just going to distribute. So you can just distribute this through. Now when you distribute this through, this is where some of you guys, again, had a hard time is knowing what to do with the variables. So let's just start with the numbers as we go through each term. So negative 2 times 5 would be negative 10. Okay, now I have c times c squared, so that would be c cubed. The d, there's nothing to multiply it by in that first term. So we take negative 2 times 5 is negative 10. C times c squared would be c cubed. And d, there's nothing to multiply that by, so it just stays d. All right, so let's go to the next term. So the next term, we have negative 2 times negative 5, so it's a positive 10. And now we have c times c, so that would be c squared. We have d times d, that would be d squared. And lastly, we're going to take negative 2 cd times negative d squared. So it'll become a positive 2. So negative 2 times a negative 1 would be a positive 2. And then there's nothing to multiply the c by, so that stays c. And d times d squared would be d cubed. So that would be your answer for letter B. All right, so here we have the length is 5x squared plus 4x minus 4, and the width is 3x squared plus 2x plus 6. We want to find the area. So remember, area is just simply the length times width. The problem is we have 3 terms times 3 terms. So we're going to use a 3 by 3 grid to make this easier. So I'll put the 5x squared plus 4x minus 4 on the top, and on the side I'm going to put 3x squared plus 2x plus 6. So when we multiply these together, we get 15x to the 4th. 3x squared times 4x would be 12x cubed. 3x squared times negative 4 is negative 12x squared. Next row, 2x times 5x squared would be 10x cubed. 2x times 4x would be 8x squared. 2x times negative 4 would be negative 8x. And lastly, 6 times 5x squared would be 30x squared. 6 times 4x would be 24x, and 6 times negative 4 would be negative 24. Now the nice thing about doing it this way is we have our like terms. Are really easy to find. So those are our like terms. So we're going to start out our answer with 15x to the 4th. Oops, let me change with the pen. There we go. So it'll be 15x to the 4th. And then we would combine our like terms for the 10x squared and 10x cubed and 12x cubed. So we get 22x cubed. And then we're going to add together 30 plus 8 to get 38. And 38 minus 12 would be 26. So it be 26x squared. And then 24 minus 8 is 16. So we would have plus 16x. And then we have minus 24. So that giant piece would be your answer for number 3. Number 4. For number 4, we want to find the end behavior for both of these graphs. And so just to make things a little bit easier for you, let's look at, I'm going to highlight these. So let's look at this first one, this parabola, as being a blue graph, and then this one we'll do as a yellow graph. All right, so just to make it clear, so that means f of x is what I did in yellow, g of x, whoops, is what I highlighted in blue. All right, so the right side of the graph. So remember, we can do this in any order. If you wanted to put, start with negative infinity, you could, but it doesn't matter. We're going to be looking at the right and left side of the graph. So let's look at the right side of the graph first. For some reason, that's pretty customary to start with that one. So as x approaches positive infinity, if you notice, the right side of the graph is going up. So the y values are going up, so approaching positive infinity. As x approaches negative infinity, so again, we're looking at the yellow graph. As x approaches negative infinity, the left side of the graph is going down. So that would be approaching negative infinity. Let's look at g of x. So g of x, again, we can start with infinity and go to the right and then do the left second. So on the blue graph, as x approaches infinity, so the right side of the graph, the y values are going down. So these are approaching negative infinity. Same thing with the left side of the graph. The left side of the graph is also going down. So as as x approaches negative infinity, the y values would also be approaching negative infinity. So it doesn't matter what order you have those in. So even in the answer key, I think the answer key had the second part just switched around just so you could remember and see that. All right, let's look at the back side. So it says number 1 here, but I think in your guys' sheets it would say number 5, 6, and 7. Just on that way made it easier when you guys were posting your answers on Schoology on that form. I did change those, and that way it would be 5, 6, and 7. Anyhow, so we want to use polynomial identity to multiply the polynomial. So we have negative 6x squared plus 7y cubed. We're going to square that. Now, you could use the identities that was talked about. I don't even know if, I think we actually, to be honest with you, I think we didn't emphasize those identities only because there's some things that are useful, other things that are not. This is one of those things that sometimes it's easier to do this. Multiply these together. So we're going to have negative 6x squared plus 7y cubed. Remember what it means to square something is you multiply it times itself. So we're going to have negative 6x squared plus 7y squared over here as well. So when you multiply these, you get a positive 36x to the 4th. When you take negative 6x squared times 7, you get negative 42x squared y cubed, if we squeeze that in there. All right, now let's look at the bottom row. And if you're wondering, oh, Mr. Murphy made a mistake. I did make a mistake. This should be 7y cubed. All right, so now I'm going to multiply everything by 7y cubed. And when I do that, 7 times negative 6 will be negative 42x squared y cubed. And again, make sure you put these in alphabetical order with the variables. I'll put this back in green. So in that way, it's easy to identify your like terms. So we'd have x squared y cubed. All right, so then lastly, 7 times 7 would be 49. And then we'd have y cubed times y cubed. So we add those exponents, you get y to the 6th. All right, so now we're going to combine like terms and write your answer. So our answer would be 36 x to the 4th. And then we'd have negative 84 minus 84x squared y cubed plus 49 y to the 6th. Whoops. That would be your final answer for that one. And lastly, for part B there, 3x plus 9 times 3x minus 9. Well, we did have a trick to multiplying those, but if you don't remember that trick, so these are what we call conjugates of each other, but we could do it this long way. So we would have 3x plus 9, 3x minus 9, and when we do that, we get 9x squared, 27x, this would be negative 27x, and negative 81. Notice 27x minus 27x would be 0, so we end up with 9x squared minus 81. And there's a trick where all you have to do is square or multiply these two together when we multiply by a conjugate. So 3x plus 9, 3x minus 9, they're what we call conjugates. So you get 9x squared. And then if you just multiply the last terms together, 9 times negative 9, you get negative 81. That's another way to do it. But otherwise, when in doubt, just always stick with what you know. So using that box method would help. All right, now we're going to factor. So now we have it in standard form, and now we're going to factor these. So you have to use those different rules. This one here, this first one, is a difference of squares. Now you're wondering, how do you know if it's a difference of squares? Well, the first thing that I recognize is with the variables. There's nothing, like if I wanted to figure out if this was a difference of cubes, this would have to be something cubed to get 64y to the 4th. There's nothing for the y. There's no number I can multiply 3 by to get y to the 4th, because that's what you do there if it was cube. You try to figure out what exponent would you multiply y by to get 4. 1 times 3 is 3, 2 times 3 is 6, so there's nothing that works there. So this is what we call a difference of squares. Now there's two ways you could go about doing this. I'm going to first start with the first way to do this. So one way to do this would be to just simply look at what would my a and b values be. What do I mean by a and b? Well, if we had this, if this was a difference of squares, a squared minus b squared, that's going to factor down to be a plus b, a minus b. So if I can figure out what my values for a and b are, I can just plug them into this format. So when we do that, for this one, I want to see what would I square to get 16x to the 12th. Well, 4 squared is 16. And x, what exponent would I apply to x to get, when I multiply it times 2, I would get 12. Well, x to the 6, so 6 times 2 is 12. So that means my a would be 4x to the 6th. To figure out what b is, we do the same thing. What would I square to get 64y to the 4th? Well, 8 squared is 64, and y squared, 2 times 2 is 4. So we would have our b value is 8y squared. So if this were the quiz or the test, and we asked you for what's just the a and b values, that's all you'd have to find, is just 4x to the 6, 8y squared. Or if we actually want you to factor this down, then we would say that we would have 4x to the 6th plus 8y squared times 4x to the 6th minus 8y squared. Now there is something else that you could have done. Now this is not something that the book teaches, and so that's why we just left it like this. But technically, both of these are divisible by 16. So if we factored out a 16 at the beginning, we'd have x squared minus 4y to the 4th. And then we would have, so let me just change this. So then we would have 16 times, and in this case, we would have our a value would just be x. We'd have x plus something, x minus something. And the square root of 4 is 2. And so we'd have 2y squared. So we'd have x plus 2y squared, x minus 2y squared. So either one of those, what I had before, would be correct, or if you left it or if you factored it this way, that would also be correct. All right, let's look at the next one. So the next one, this is a sum of two cubes. So we want to figure out again our a and b values. Why? Because if we have a cubed plus b cubed, that's going to be the same as a. And remember, we have that acronym, that SOAP acronym, so we'd have the same sign in between those, so a plus b. Then we square that a value, then we have the opposite sign, that's the O in our acronym, and then a times b. Then we have AP, always positive, and then b squared. So that's the form we want to put it in. So we want to figure out our a and b values. So our a in this case would be, well, what would I cube to get 8x to the 6? Well, 2 cubed is 8, and x squared, 2 times 3 is 6. So 2x squared would be my a value. My b value would just be y, because y cubed would just be y. So we're going to have 2x squared plus y. Then we square the 2x squared. That's where some of you guys got it wrong. So you were saying like 2x to the 4th. We got to square the 2 as well. So it'd be 4x to the 4th when you square that. And then we multiply those, so then it'll be minus. We multiply those two values together, so it'll be minus 2x squared y. And then it would just be whatever our b value is squared, so y squared. So this would be the only possible answer you could use for part B. All right, let's look at number 7. So for number 7, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be creating a box out of this piece of cardboard. So when we create a box out of this piece of cardboard, let me just make my picture look nice here. So let's shade in this inside. Okay, so that's our inside of our box. Okay, so then we have a box. Oops, and I should have this line here. There we go. So we want to figure out what the dimensions would be of the box after we cut a corner, a square out of each corner. And so what's going to happen is if we had a square here and here and here and here, and if I cut that square out and remove it, well, now we're losing whatever that length was from both sides. And that length is x, and we're going to lose it from both sides. So we would have 13 minus 2x would be that length. The width, again, the piece of cardboard was 8 inches wide. And if we remove x from both sides, well, now we're going to have 8 minus 2x. And again, the reason why it's minus 2x's is because we have two sides that we're removing a square from, each square with the length x. Now, if we fold up those sides to make the box, whatever x is going to be the height of your box. So those would be the dimensions. So when it says, what is the volume of the tray? We want to write equation in factored form. So we don't have to multiply these together. I think I worked with some of you guys yesterday or the other day, and we put these in standard form. We don't have to worry about that. We're just going to leave it in factored form. Whoops. So you could have those in any order. We could have x times 13 minus 2x times 8 minus 2x. There's a lot of different ways, but any way you write that, the length, width, and height would be x, 8 minus 2x, and 13 minus 2x. So multiplying those together would give you the volume, but we can leave it in factored form. So this would actually be our answer for the volume. All right, so that is the gold section. So hopefully that answers the questions that you had from there. Otherwise, you can move on now to the yellow section.